Hey, Miguel, Iturrate, and Devin Miller back here with the Cage Rage podcast, and we're going to do an extended podcast on the UFC 235. We've got 235 coming up March 2nd out of Las Vegas. It's a pay-per-view. The main card is obviously a pay-per-view. The mid-card is on ESPN, and then you're going to get 4 fights on the Fight Pass. With Devin, I'm going to go over the main card and a couple of the fights on the ESPN card that are worthy of looking at. And Dev, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Miguel, man. The wind is about to blow my house over, but other than that, I'm doing good. And,
yeah, I hear the weather's kind of rough up where you guys are at. I can't complain. I really can't, so sorry. But let's take it in Vegas. It snowed the other day, so hopefully it's not snowing at the T-Mobile Arena this weekend. We got Jon Jones coming back. Now, I've been looking at the lines for this one. Jon Jones was up at minus 1375 about a week ago. Now we're entering fight week. He's at minus 900. I know that's not your bread and butter, but some people think Smith has a chance. That's what that means. What do you think, Dev?
Well, the last time I remember a headlining fight having this big of an underdog is actually Matt Serra and George St. Pierre, and we remember how that turned out. That was probably the biggest upset in UFC history. In all seriousness, when you look at their resume, you look at their body of work, take away Jones's scandals and all the outside of the cage conversation. When you just look at what we've seen in there, Smith is a fighter that has some holes. I think this is a great story because Smith started his career, I think, like 15-13. And since then, he's went like 16-2, and now he's fighting for a world title. And he's definitely a good comeback story, and it would be one of the best stories that we've seen in a long time if he were to be the one to finally beat Jon Jones. But the odds, I think, are right. I think it's highly unlikely. If it were to happen, it would be a huge upset. But Anthony Smith is a guy who a lot of people are, he's out there really defending himself, talking about, the internet being so mean and stuff. And, he's gotten a lot of hate and stuff. But and I feel for the guy because he's a cool guy, but it's because he really hasn't done that much to deserve a title fight. He fought a very old Shogun and Rashad Evans, pulled off some big knockouts, and then he had a lackluster win over Volkan Oezdemir to get this fight. So I understand why the odds are that bad. I understand why so many people are counting him out so bad. But he's a big underdog, but it's almost worth cheering for him because it would be such a cool story if he were to pull this off.
I agree with you 100%. At the end, I want Anthony Smith to win this fight. I'd like the Jon Jones break to just be over because it's just too much of a circus for me. If it's going to happen, it might as well happen right now. But is Anthony Smith, the right guy? We're going to find out on Saturday. The problem, I think, here is that he's not the right guy. I think Jon Jones is probably going to win this fight. But that Smith, really, with the 40 fights, the experience he's bringing, he's playing the part perfectly right. Money's coming in. He's saying the right things. He's getting people to like him. We're going to want him to win until the fight starts, and then Jon Jones does Jon Jones' thing, and I think we're all going to be like, oh, well, that was good. I hope it doesn't go that way because I really do think Smith deserves love, not hate. But we're in a situation here where Jones has just been so dominant every time we've seen him that it's hard to see it going a different way this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. And what it's reminding me of a little bit is the whole DC and Derek Lewis build-up where it's like we wanted so bad to believe that this could be a legitimate fight. And then when the fight started right off the bat, it's like, okay, we're stupid for even buying this pay-per-view because we knew that how this fight was going to go. And they can sell about anything. I mean, they can turn even the most lopsided matchups into somewhat exciting because just the build-up and just the whole, well, what if he were to pull this off? Like, I mean, it's interesting, it'd be such a cool story, but then they get in there and it's like, okay, well, we remember that Jon Jones is Jon Jones. And I think it's interesting to talk about this fight right now, and I did a CRP minute about the Thiago Santos-Jan Blachowicz fight that just happened yesterday, because that fight was significant because something to keep in mind is just a little bit over a year ago. Like 365 days in a year is about 375 days ago. Thiago Santos, who just beat Jan Blachowicz yesterday, has a win over Anthony Smith, and now he's kind of being looked at when you consider that Cormier's out of the light heavyweight picture. Gustafson's already lost twice to Jones. There's no really other big contender. Thiago Santos, who's the last guy to hold a win over Anthony Smith and just won this week, he looks like the guy that could be, probably the best in line for a title fight to fight the winner of this fight. If Jones wins this fight, though, are they going to set him up with another guy that is pretty much a guaranteed win, or is Jones going to look toward heavyweight at this point? What do you think about that, Miguel?
Well, I don't know. Thiago did look good this weekend, but I asked myself, just in terms of a challenge to Jon Jones, Anthony Johnson's recently retired, but Johnson was probably the most formidable knockout artist that you could put in there against a guy like Jon Jones. I think Thiago's going to be, I don't want to use the term B-class Anthony Johnson because Thiago's better than that, but I think he's a little smaller. I think he presents a little bit less danger to Jon Jones than someone like a Johnson. So I do think it has that redo all over again kind of thing. And let me tell you, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you what happens if Anthony Smith pulls a win off this weekend. We're going to get a rematch with Jon Jones, and they're going to try to redo and make sure that gets undone as fast as possible. So Smith's got his back to the wall. He's going to have to do it twice if he really is going to pull this off.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Thiago Santos, the problem with me is this guy was a guy who had an up and down middleweight career. He's another guy just like Smith who we've seen both these guys go up in weight and they look better at light heavyweight. And some are attributing that to a massive cut. I attribute it more to a division that's just so weak right now. And I think the UFC, if they're going to keep covering for Jones and all the scandals, they're going to keep him around. They're going to have him as champion. They're going to market him still as this great fighter. They're going to start having to look at his best matchups. His biggest matchups that he could have right now are at heavyweight. And a fight with, we just saw Ngannou get a big win. Stipe, obviously a third DC fight. But there's so little up in those weight divisions right now that Jon Jones is going to have to carry everything until there's a legit contender that comes around because he's already beat Gustafsson and Cormier twice. Cormier's out there talking about he's going to retire. Thiago Santos, like I said, it's not like he's got some perfect resume. I mean, he's a good fighter, and same thing that goes here with Anthony Smith. So unless they just want Jon Jones is just to be the dominant. He's just a massive favorite over everybody he goes against. He's going to just reign for years and years and years. I think they're going to have to start trying to push Jones into heavyweight to get some interesting matchups.
I agree. I think we'll see Jones at least 2 more times this year in calendar year 2019. It's up in the air whether he'll move before the end of the year, but at some point he's got to go. The co-feature, let's get right to the co-feature, and then we can come back on these big podcasts to the Jon Jones thing because I got a couple questions for you. But the co-feature, we've got the welterweight title on the line. Tyron Woodley, not the favorite fighter of Dana White. He's facing Kamaru Usman. Woodley a minus 185 favorite. Usman coming back at plus 160. Bottom line is Woodley doesn't fight a lot, but he's going to be a tough out for anybody.
I agree. I think he's being very overlooked. I think Kamaru is very stealthy. I think he's very solid. He's got good wrestling. There's so much that's going into this division right now. Obviously, we can't even mention this fight without talking about the big elephant in the room. The big controversy is it confuses, I think, everybody here at the CRP is that they picked Usman over Covington when the money fight is definitely Woodley versus Covington, and there's you got Covington basically saying, I want an interim belt. They're not giving me a title fight. I'm going to sue the UFC. And you got Covington talking smack to Usman, and Usman talking smack to Covington, and Usman and Woodley talking smack, and Covington talking smack to Woodley, and then you throw Ben Askren in there, who's going around saying, I knew Kamaru Usman back in the day. He was Marty from Nebraska, and and they got into it at the press conference, and. There's so much that's tying in to this division right now, and you got this triangle of contenders at the top. And what was confusing to me is, and I don't know if they just look at this as because when you consider that they don't really seem to like Woodley, do they look at this as a more dangerous fight for Woodley, or do they think he's going to win and then they can just wait for the Covington fight later on this year? They kind of made Covington a good guy in the whole situation. It's really confusing because Covington was definitely Usman, the guys he's beat, Damian Maia, RDA, he's beat them after Covington already beat them. And they still went with Usman, who's a less known name and more of a controversial figure than somebody like Colby Covington. I want to know what your opinion is on it, why they chose Usman to even get this fight over Covington.
It is a little bit of a mystery from the little bit of press that I've gathered on it. It does look like Woodley had a little something to do with it because Dana always paints Woodley as like, does he want the fight, does he not want the fight? I also kind of feel, and this is just my feeling, but Covington, he's one of those outspoken guys, and sometimes those guys put their foot in their mouth. If you remember back in the old days, Miguel Torres, he actually got cut from the UFC because of stupid things like that, and they do pretty much have you unlocked with a contract. Maybe he made some type of move or some type of conversation somewhere and pissed some people off, and he decided to say, let him wait. And that's about all I can speculate on that, because Covington to me and Woodley was the big money fight. Why stay away from that? Usman definitely, could play spoiler in there, and he would be a good fight for any one of the guys coming off of a fight there. But it doesn't make sense because they're usually money chasers, and I think, like you said, Covington-Woodley, it's a no-brainer. That was the biggest fight in the division right now.
Yeah, your comment on Covington, regardless of political affiliations, because he is, at one point, he was probably the most hated MMA fighter in the UFC. Yeah, I mean, and you got this, but at the same time, he was playing the part well, and I do believe a lot of it is an act. But him taking the interim title belt and setting it on Trump's desk and taking the photo op with the interim title belt, and he's going out wearing MAGA hats and he's insulting Brazilians. He's playing that just white trash, just idiot, role to a T. He don't care. He doesn't care. He's looking at it like, this is going to get me publicity. It's going to get me fights. They're putting these contenders in front of me. I'm beating them. I don't care. And he's been calling out Woodley for a long time. And one thing I do like about Usman is a good fighter, a very good fighter, and he's had smack with everybody. I mean, Covington, Askren, Woodley, obviously. I mean, he's been out there also just. So you got all these different personalities now at welterweight. This is a very exciting division, and it's a deep top 10. And I was just very surprised they went with Usman first. I thought that they would wait. I thought they would probably make Usman versus Askren for Askren's debut, and then they would make Covington and Woodley. But they shut that down. I mean, and it definitely looks like Woodley, if he can get through Usman, probably has Covington next.
And when you went through Covington's laundry list and getting into politics and stuff, remember the UFC's recent experience with Khabib and Conor, where they sort of lost control of the build up there, and things got out of control. Covington may have said something, may have crossed the line. Who knows? When you get into politics and stuff, people get crazy, and who knows if they decide to take a little bit of the heat off of that, maybe for the kids' own sake. I don't know, but. It's a weird and unique situation where the UFC is not chasing the money on this fight. We're actually maybe getting a better fight. I like the Usman-Woodley matchup.
I agree. I think.
Let's move on, Dev. Sorry to cut you off, but let's move on to the one. This could have been a main event, right? If you talk Robbie Lawler and Ben Askren, this was expected to be a main event. When they announced it, they was like, all right, the main event's done, and they put 2 title fights on top of it. But this still may be the most scrutinized fight on the card. Askren comes in favored over Lawler. Lawler, the former champion, a real hard hat of a veteran, you know what I mean? It's like, they didn't do him many favors giving him Bobby Lawler. If Bobby Lawler comes in as prepared as Bobby Lawler can get for this fight, then I don't know if this shouldn't be a lot closer on the odds. How do you see this one?
Well, if Covington's the most hated fighter in the UFC, Robbie Lawler might be the most loved. Him and Cerrone are the ones that I can think of. The thing with Robbie Lawler is he went through that great championship run when he had the great first title fight with Johnny Hendricks that he lost the decision. He had the second decision win. The second fight they had, he won the decision. Then he had that just easily one of the top 5 greatest fights in UFC history, maybe the greatest title fight, up there with Gus and Jones and others. With Roy McDonald, a fantastic fight. Then he had another classic fight with Carlos Condit. That man was in so many wars in about a 4-year period. And at one point, I was saying, Robbie Lawler's he can't take these kind of fights too long. And then he met up with Woodley, who is just such a powerhouse, so fast. And Woodley got a lot. That was the build-up for that fight seemed a little lackluster compared to the other Lawler fights at that point. And Lawler had already been through so much wars. Woodley was fresh. Woodley called for that fight for a long time, and Woodley shut the lights out in 2 or 3 minutes. And since then, we've seen Lawler come back. He got a decision win over Donald Cerrone, and then he lost a decision to RDA. He doesn't seem the same to me, but he's had some time off to heal up, some much-needed time off. But when we look at Ben Askren, a lot of UFC fans that just strictly follow him, that have MMA synonymous with the UFC, and the UFC is just MMA to them, that's all they watch. They're unfamiliar with Askren because this is his UFC debut, but this guy has been for a long time maybe the best fighter outside of the UFC. He's been the champion in one championship. He was the champion in Bellator. He's not a very exciting fighter, which is why Dana didn't want him for a long time, but he's one of those type of guys that if he gets his hands on you, he's such a high-level wrestler and high-level grappler that he gets you to the mat, and it's just he's so good there that you just can't stop it. He's kind of like a bigger Khabib, and I like this fight. I'm going to be pulling for Lawler because I've always really appreciated Robbie. I really like Robbie, but they're bringing this fight in as a fight to try to get Askren in the win column because they can do a lot of big things with him, including, since I don't believe the George St. Pierre narrative at all, I still believe that's a possibility for an inaugural 65 title fight would be Askren and GSP. I think it would sell.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. I think you're right, absolutely. By picking Lawler, they're picking a nice feather for Askren to put in his cap to start off his career. It's the right move. The bottom line is you just went through Lawler's laundry list of fights in the UFC, all wars. You know what? The guy had tons of miles before he got to the UFC for this last run. His Strikeforce fights with Jacare and, losses to guys like Jason Miller in the past, Tim Kennedy. He fought Matt Leland, Babalu Sobral. These were fights at 185 pounds. So coming down to 170, the guy definitely is one of the true warriors of the last decade. You know what I mean? For sure, a decorated guy, and he deserves all the credit he gets. All the run he had with the UFC afterwards, hopefully he banked his money, put it away, because Robbie Lawler to me is a superhero. But here, they're giving him a tall order because at the end of the day, too, with Askren off to the side in Bellator, he doesn't even have a lot of common opponents with people where you can say, how does he match up here or how does he do well with this guy? I mean, Michael Korkishov, I don't, who's he fought over there that has equal, names on the resume and stuff like that. He went away from Bellator before the migration of all that. His best win, maybe Shinya Aoki, 155-pounder at the end of the day. So we're going to find out more for him. If he isn't what they say he is, Lawler could eat his lunch. But I think, when he's 18-0, he's got a lot of hype. And there's also the X factor with Askren in that you hear from people in the business, and you've heard from a long time, that he is all that he is a blanket grappler, that as a wrestler you can put him in with jiu-jitsu guys and he doesn't get lost and trapped and caught, that he's adapted real well. On the grappling end, you're talking about an ace all the way through. On the striking end, if Lawler gets to land and gets him confused, I think you'll see him unravel fast, and that may be his weakness. So we'll see. Very interesting fight, Dev. How do you see it?
Well, the fight that I think is actually the best win that Askren has on his career was he beat Douglas Lima in Bellator before he left. And I think Lima's the closest that we have to a fighter like Lawler to compare to, and it was pretty impressive. I mean, I remember seeing the interview that Rogan did with Askren, where Rogan brought that up. Like, he was like, I didn't believe in you until I saw you fight Douglas Lima. And he's like, and you did the exact same thing you did to him that you do to everybody. And Douglas Lima is a killer. Douglas Lima is about to fight MVP in the semifinal of the welterweight Grand Prix. He's a very good fighter, and that was impressive. And I actually heard an interview with the One Championship president, because they just signed that TNT deal. He did an interview on Ariel Helwani's show, and he was talking about, they brought up, Helwani is one of the few journalists that's willing to ask the tough questions. He brought up the trade for Mighty Mouse Johnson and Ben Askren, and the one president said something he was like, I felt like we've had the best welterweight in the world for a long time, and I know we do, because he's like, I've seen personally Askren in the gym with very notable champions in the UFC. He's like, I'm not going to mention any names, but he's like, I think you know who I'm talking about. He was like, and he just ragdolls them. And it was very easy to know who he's talking about. He's teammates with Tyron Woodley. And he's a welterweight, which is even more interesting. If they both win, they're not going to fight each other. They both come out and said, I'm not going to fight each other. And Woodley's even been on record, and Woodley's a very brash, arrogant type of fighter. I mean, he's very proud of himself. He calls himself the GOAT, even with GSP, in his legacy. He says, I'm the greatest welterweight ever. He's even been on record saying, I'm not going to fight Askren. Askren's my coach. He's my wrestling coach. And if he's really that good, it's going to be interesting. But the thing I want to throw at you real quick, Miguel, is we've talked on the CRP, because right now you've got 125, 135, 145, 155, and then you got this weird 15-pound jump between 55 and 70, 70 to 85. I've thought forever that it would make more sense for them to move welterweight to 175 and open up a 65-pound division, especially considering that those two weight classes have the most talent in them. And now you finally have two guys who might be the two best welterweights in the world in the same organization, who are teammates, saying they won't fight each other. And Askren's been coming out saying, I'm going to be the 65 champ. What do you think the chances are, if Woodley wins, Askren wins, that Askren's going to have enough pull to finally force the UFC to make that move, to move welterweight to 75 and open up that 65 division with Askren for a title fight?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's intriguing as hell, and I think all the talk is always good for MMA, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Does Askren have the pull? And the answer to me, if I'm the UFC, the truth is that the decision here lies with the boxing commissions. The UFC could decide that they want to enforce other weight classes and force people's hands and stuff, but the unified rules would need to change across the boxing commissions to adapt to new weight classes, right? So I think that that's a difficult thing. And the bottom line is does Askren have the pull? No fighter should have the pull. That stuff should happen over reviews and stuff. So what happens next time if you have another fighter? So I think it's a tall order to change the weight classes on a political level, having them established and stuff. Is there room for, fixes and wiggle room in boxing and in MMA? The answer is yes.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the Athletic Commission did approve a 65 division. It's just that the UFC hasn't been willing to open it up. And you're right, though, because what does that do to other organizations like Bellator and stuff? Do they have to follow suit? Do they have to dissolve their 175-pound division and make it 75 and 65? Of course, it would make more sense to see 125 to 185 with 10-pound differences in the weight classes. I think that makes the most sense. It's just they got stuck in there because 170 was such a big division, headlined by guys like Matt Hughes and George St. Pierre for so long, and they're kind of grounded in those divisions. But that 15-pound gap, there's a lot of guys, people like Kevin Lee that I can think of, that really struggle to make it down to 55 but are not big enough for 70. Then you got Kelvin Gastelum, who's a little small at 85 but a little too big for 70. It'd be great to see them do that. I would think that Askren would be the prime candidate for that division if they were to open that up. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen eventually. I just don't know if it's going to be because of Askren, but I think it's got to.
The thing about Askren is that he brings a combination of being an athlete, but also being an outspoken spokesperson type of guy. Even when he wasn't with the UFC, he had no problem giving his opinion and laying it out on the line there. So if anybody's got a chance of getting it done, it might be a guy like Askren, especially if he puts together a couple of big wins, right? So we'll see how it goes there. And that's an interesting talk. I think we should take it up in another podcast, because in boxing, too, you've got kilograms and things like that, which sometimes add up nicely. But at the end of the day, boxing, after 175 pounds, just has two weight classes. So boxing's a mess all in and of itself. And, once you get down to the lower weight classes, the UFC is trying to do away with weight classes, and that's not the way to go either. So I think that's a great conversation for another podcast. But let's keep going, man. We got bantamweights, 135-pounders. We got Cody Garbrandt, another former champion. Pedro Munhoz, an up-and-coming guy. This fight's the opener on the pay-per-view, but I'm excited about it. Garbrandt, one of those guys that you kind of had that, and he was on the cusp of greatness, and now I'm kind of wondering, what do we got? What do you think?
Well, I think it's important to remember that he did have TJ hurt in both fights. He rocked him in the first fight, dropped him at the end of the first round. The second fight, he actually, before TJ countered him, he actually cracked TJ early in that second fight too. His performance against Dominic Cruz, I agree with you. I was thinking, man, this kid's going to be great. He actually fought my cousin. My cousin James Porter actually fought Cody Garbrandt over in Pittsburgh. And we didn't know who he was at the time. And Cody Garbrandt, so I got kind of like a special connection in that category when it comes to Cody Garbrandt. I still think he's so young. He's like 27. He's such a talented kid. My biggest concern with Cody Garbrandt is I just hope he doesn't make the mistake that TJ Dillashaw refused to make, and that's Team Alpha Male. That when Team Alpha Male gave him all that he could offer, all they could offer him over there with Uriah Faber, TJ Dillashaw followed Dwayne Ludwig and went over to Colorado, and he got called a snake, he got called a traitor, he got called all this. Cody Garbrandt has stayed, and he's loyal, and he's ride or die with this gym. But Cody Garbrandt, the MMA, and I'm sure you would agree with this, Miguel, this is kind of a selfish sport. You've got to get in there by yourself. You got to fight these guys on your own. Teams are important. You never forget your roots. I agree with that stuff. But at some point, if Garbrandt, especially if he keeps taking losses, he's not being able to beat the top of the division, he's going to have to start looking at, is there a possibility that there's something missing in my camp, that I need to go somewhere else? And he's going against a guy who, Pedro Munhoz is a solid fighter, and he's going to be the better grappler. He's got heavy hands. He's got some knockout wins on his resume. This is a close fight. This is a good fight, and I think Cody should be the better athlete, the better striker. But the thing that concerns me the most is Garbrandt in his gym, where he's at. I'm not sure if that's where he should stay.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you've taken 2 losses in a row, even if they're in title fights, even if they're to a guy as skilled as Dillashaw, you do want to see where the guy's mindset is coming into his next fight. And I think that plays into exactly what you're talking about. Is he in the right place right now for himself? Is the gym refreshing him? Is it bringing him, back into the ring with a positive, get back in the winning track kind of thing? I think all that's important. I think we already saw that they got him to a certain skill level that's pretty elite. You can continue that with other people, but right now what worries me most is the mindset. How does he come into his next fight? Because Munhoz, really not a lot to lose, not a big name, in terms of Q score and stuff like that, but he's put together a streak in the UFC that's something like 6-1 in his last 7 fights. So you have to say that that's impressive. His only loss came to John Dodson, an undersized bantamweight. That may be your clue that Garbrandt is in good shape in this fight on the physical end, so it all comes down to mind.
I agree with that. And I think that Garbrandt, if I was doing the wagering right now, I would say that Garbrandt's a safe pick, because I think Garbrandt's going to be able to do enough. I think he's got good enough wrestling to keep this fight on the feet, and he is so explosive. It's just, is he going to get overzealous? The one thing we saw with TJ is when he gets somebody hurt, he tends to get a little bit, emotional. And I think a lot of that had to do with who he was fighting, with all the history with him and TJ. He didn't fight that way against Dominic Cruz, though. He was that was a legendary performance. He cracked the code that several other fighters were unable to crack with Dominic Cruz, about how do you figure out this elusive, crazy movement, inside and out style, where Cruz isn't even really landing that hard, but he's avoiding shots. You can't hit him, you can't get to him. He solved the puzzle. He cracked the code with that and just shut Cruz down for 5 rounds, and it was so impressive. And I think the UFC thought they had a huge star on their hands after that, and then TJ Dillashaw comes in and beats him twice. And now you got Garbrandt really trying to rebuild his career, and where does he go from here with Dillashaw on top of this division?
Yeah, I think definitely he's gonna have to do some work before he earns another fight for the title there. You know, with Cejudo now in the mix and stuff, that could be interesting because Garbrandt he's just got 13 fights and he's 27 years old, as you said. I think if he takes his time and does it right, we could see him have another run at the top. Now, let's move on here. We're going to skip over Tisha Torres and Weili Zhang, a ladies' fight that's coming up on the pay-per-view. We're going to head over to the ESPN portion of the card. A couple of the fights there on the men's side. Ringing the bell here. In the featherweight division, we got veteran dog Jeremy Stephens, and he's taking on Zabit Magomedshariopov. Magomedshariopov qualifies as a up-and-comer. I was wondering, Devin, is he going to be your choice for prospect of the week?
Yeah, I'm so glad you referenced that, man. That's awesome because yes, he is actually, and that's cool. It was either going to be him or Johnnie Walker. But I'm going with Zabit on it because Zabit is somebody I think is going to be a big star at featherweight. He's so exciting to watch. I mean, this guy, he's got so much skill. Ariel Helwani is very high on the guy. Said that it was one of the best things that happened back in 2017 was Zabit making his debut, and I think he's 4-0 in the UFC so far. He's had he's had a lot of good exciting fights. I'm glad that they're putting him in against somebody like Stephens because I thought that he should get pushed into the top 10. And this is interesting, and sometimes I get some feedback from my buddies on my CRP minutes that I tie too much stuff in together with other things that are going on, but we just had Max Holloway announced that he's going to be fighting an interim title fight with Dustin Poirier at 155 pounds, and he's the king right now at 145. My number one question when I seen that is what's going on with featherweight. Well, a guy like Zabit Magomedshariopov is going to be somebody that could possibly be a new name, a new face for that division going forward. Since Holloway, it pretty much appears is going to move up. And Stephens took a first round loss to Jose Aldo. So, and Stephens is a very powerful veteran, very just mean striker, got serious power in his hands. So this is a big test for Zabit going forward. I think Zabit, if he wins this fight, though, especially if Holloway is no longer going to be in this division is going to be wide open, and Zabit could get pushed.
And I agree with you. I think you got a little bit of a geriatric group with the guys like Stephens. You got Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo, as you mentioned. And by geriatric, I just mean older guys who've been at the top level. But they've been there a while. It's time to sunset some of those guys, bring in some new talent. Magomedshariopov definitely looks like that. What do you think of him? He gets by Stephens. Maybe a return match for Ortega against Zabit.
I think that'd be interesting. The only thing is, now that I saw a headline this past week that Nunez is not going to fight Holly Holm in Brazil for 237. Aldo's made it very clear that he wants to fight in Brazil again, and I think we might see. That was my first. Like I said, there were so many questions I had when I saw that Holloway is going to be fighting Poirier. Does he hold on to that belt? What goes on? Because I think we might see Ortega and Aldo for the featherweight title at 237 if Holloway relinquishes that. But then you got guys at featherweight like Alexander Volkanovski, Zabit, Yair Rodriguez. All these are great fighters, but they're not really big names yet. Like, are they big enough to become champion yet? Zabit is a guy I think that they could push to be. Okay, we're going to use him. We're going to springboard him. He's going to be the headliner for the prelims on ESPN Network. We're going to use him. We're going to get his name out on a huge card, and I think they're going to springboard him for sure. I think the fight with Volkanovski, like you said, if something doesn't falls through with Aldo and Ortega, he could fight Ortega. He could fight Aldo. He could fight somebody like that, especially if this is a quick win or something. So. I do think that if Zabit looks impressive here, they'll push him because he's a very exciting fighter, and he could be like a new Khabib for this division, where a Russian type of name that can be pushed to the top of the division, which is going to be wide open without Holloway.
And the last fight that we're going to cover for UFC 235, we're going to take a look at the light heavyweight match. You mentioned Johnnie Walker as another one of those up-and-coming names. I think, he's got the right name in terms of the whiskey connection and stuff like that for future marketing if it comes up. But he's got Misha Cirkunov. Misha, a guy who once upon a time, about 10 years ago, had that prospect label. Since then, obviously, some of the shine has come off there. But he's been grinding for a few years and maybe represents a little bit more experience than Walker heading into this fight. How do you see this one?
I think this is a bigger step up in competition for Walker than his last opponent was, which Justin Ledette. And Walker came out of the Contender Series. He's had a couple very impressive first-round knockouts. I think they're definitely wanting to push him. I mean, he's got the name. He's got the he's got like this weird attitude where he was like, hanging over the cage and, smiling and going in there and finishing guys quick. And you got people on after that fight, I shared a CRP minute where I was showing Twitter tweets where there were people saying, oh, this is going to be the guy that beats Jon Jones. And so if he's got it's weird that some people just have that whatever it is, where they just are like magnets to attention. They pull off something impressive and they just get that kind of attention put on them right away. And whatever that is, Walker seems to have it, that he's got superstardom written all over him. Misha Cirkunov is going to be a tough fight, though, because we've never really seen somebody that can put Walker on his back and can put him in a vulnerable position. We don't really know how Walker's going to react in that kind of a situation. So it's interesting. My big concern with Cirkunov is just he went down pretty fast with Volkan Oezdemir. He went down like 20-some seconds. The first punch that Oezdemir landed, he went down. So and Walker seems a little bit more powerful than Oezdemir. So I think the power might be the difference in this fight for Walker.
Definitely, to me, a guy like Cirkunov, with all due respect, and I've known about him for a long time, he never got rid of what I would label like a tentativeness. You can't be tentative in this game and let the other guy get off first, and he seems to wind up doing that in some of his fights. And that worries me about it, because when you get a guy hungry like Walker, you may only get that one shot, and when if you give him that one shot, he's just going to take it. That's all there is to it. There is no competition involved when you have a hungry fighter. You got a guy who's a killer more than a competitor, and that's what I think you have here, a difference too. Walker on his way up, Cirkunov been around. We've already seen what Cirkunov brings.
Yeah, I agree, and I think they're definitely. I'll check the rankings real quick, but I think they got Cirkunov near the top 10 of this division. I don't even know if they have Walker ranked yet. Let me see. Yeah, they got Walker ranked 15, and they got Cirkunov 14, so they're actually taking Walker a little slower than I thought. I figured they would go ahead and be trying to push him into the top 10, and I think they're doing the right thing if that's the case, is just gradually have him move up to those top 15s, because if they start throwing him in there with like Manawa and Santos and stuff, that's a big risk on a potential name for them in a division that definitely needs somebody. We were just talking earlier in the podcast about Jon Jones and Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith and all that, and it's just right now, unless they have somebody that comes along like a Johnnie Walker, let's say he goes in there and he flattens Misha Cirkunov, and then he gets in there with Jimmy Manawa or Latifi or Corey Anderson, and he flattens them, and he's this feared. Then he gets a big fight like with Gustafsson, and he knocks him out too. And now we've got this just perfect storm of this just guy who we've just seen do nothing but wreck everybody. That fight would really sell with Jon Jones. But until then, you're going to have Jon Jones just, okay, we've got this dominant, unbeatable almost champion going against guys that he's a minus 1,000 favorite against. And it's just how it's going to be, because unless some big upset happens or there's somebody that comes along that's just garnering a lot of attention and pulling off big, dominant wins, it's what we're going to have in this division, because this division is so thin.
I agree with you. When you pinpoint a guy like a Walker that you say he could be a prospect, he could be one of the guys that gets there, you kind of got to take care of him. Now matchmaking does come into play, and you got to get into a situation where you're putting him in good spots to win because you're looking for him to be an opponent 5 or 6 fights down the line. You could really build that up if it goes right, and if not, if it gets derailed, then back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the last thing they want right now is him to get beat. So I think they're pretty confident with Misha, and that's just fight promotion. I mean, you put your finger on a guy that you think could be a big star, and the rest of the guys, you'll give them a shot. I mean, ultimately the UFC can't control what happens inside that octagon unless it's like a paid-off fight. But so they're giving Cirkunov the fight, but obviously they think that this is gonna be a win for Walker, and that it'll move him forward in the division. Maybe another big highlight for him. And he was, like I'm glad you brought up the whole prospect of the week, because I like that idea, because I think there's a lot of people right now, because of the talent depth in the UFC, that kind of fall asleep. They don't know who some of these newer guys are. I want to draw attention to that, like get people familiar with some of these people card by card. But Walker wasn't my prospect of the week just because I feel like he's already there. Like it feels like people are already kind of high on him, and they already know who exactly he is. And I'm also not so sold that he's going to be who they are hoping he will be, like I think Zabit will. And but I do think this is a perfect main event, co-main event for the prelims for a great pay-per-view. And that's one thing, we've covered the fights we're going to cover, Miguel, and one thing we can say is the UFC has given us a treat with this card. I hope they all make weight.
Yeah, let's say if the card goes through and they had some rocky things pop up here on fight day and, the weigh-ins and stuff, but if the card goes through as we talked about, we are in for a superior card, probably the best card so far this year by a bunch,
Yeah, this is a great card. They're definitely making up for that disaster that just happened down in Australia. So, yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. This has been the Cage Reach podcast. Miguel Robbie. I've been joined by our ace, Devin Miller. We're talking about UFC 235. We went long, but we did a preview on most of the main fights. We skipped Tisha Torres and Weili Zhang. Maybe we'll do something separate for the ladies divisions. But we want to concentrate on one of the best cards of the year. And hit subscribe if you like what you see. Listen to the whole podcast, and we'll catch up to you here throughout the week with updates and stuff. I know Devin's on top of it, so if someone fails weight and stuff like that, we'll get an update,
Yeah, I agree with Miguel, man. We are pumping out content. So, but between me and Miguel, pretty much every day we're posting something, whether we're covering odds, we're covering little, just here's the news, here's what you need to check out, here's a headline that you need to look at, and here's how it's tying into the division. We've got a boxing, analyst who's making predictions on bets that's got a great record and is calling underdogs that are winning big money for people. And it's actually making me start really thinking, like, if every single week I can make a $300 profit on some underdog pick that this guy's picking, I might pick it. And, and so, but hit the like button for our Facebook page, hit our like button for our YouTube page. We're continuing to pump out content. We're getting better with this. We're getting more organized. Like us.
I mean, the bottom line is on the MMA side, on the boxing side, we didn't want to launch unless we knew we had legs and we were going to last, and we got the right people because we've got the depth of knowledge. So we'll be around, and you can catch up, CRP, hit subscribe, and we'll end it there. Thanks, guys.